Pop punk, a genre of music that gets made fun of a lot. Songs about girl problems, high school, hating your hometown, hanging out with your friends, pizza. Pop punk truly has it all. But if pop punk is really this bad, let's see how bad it can get. In this video, I'm going to talk about the worst pop punk albums of all time. So this list is made up of albums that pretty much the general consensus in the scene is that they are some of the worst pop punk albums of all time, and then I have some of my personal picks in here as well. Let's start off the list with this modern classic, Machine Gun Kelly's Tickets to My Downfall. It's not as bad as you think. Or, at least, it's not as bad as you remember. Probably. Now, I know everyone wants me to destroy this album, but I actually think this album delivers on what it promises. Nostalgic pop punk that sounds like pop punk from the early 2000s. And I'm not gonna let you destroy Halsey's part on Forget Me Too. That's probably the best part of this entire album. If you look at any of the comments from any of the songs or music videos during MGK's pop punk era with the two albums, most of the comments are very happy that this sounds like nostalgic emo and pop punk from the early 2000s, and they're right. This album nails that entire aesthetic, and it's probably the most mainstream pop punk album that we've gotten in years. Now, none of the MGK pop punk albums led to this big, massive pop punk revival in the mainstream. We did have some more pop punk back in the mainstream, but it was already established artists, Demi Lovato, Willow, Avril Lavigne, although, you know, Avril Lavigne came back, I guess, with more pop punk. Olivia Rodrigo would be a new artist, and a lot of her popular songs were 100% pop punk songs, so you had that, but you didn't really have a, you know, this big groundswell of new and up-and-coming pop punk bands getting thrust into the mainstream. That didn't happen. And just to talk about mainstream sellout a little bit, I do think Tickets to My Downfall was probably the better album, but, you know, Emo Girl was a massive hit song from mainstream sellout. And it's crazy when you think about it that it took until, what, 2022 to have a song called Emo Girl, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, of covers and versions of Punk Rock Girl. I also have to give a shout out to MGK's song with Youngblood, I'm Not Okay, because that song, the music video, everything about it, they nailed the 2000s emo pop punk aesthetic. Have you ever wondered what a mature Simple Plan album would sound like? Well, we got one in 2008. How many times have we seen bands in the scene give an interview before they release an album and say that they're going to mature on their next album? Their sound is going to be so much mature than their older material. And you can't go more cliche than Simple Plan did with the marketing and rollout of this album. The black and white album cover, the band members all looking in different directions. It's about as cliche as you can get. And honestly, you can even say that this really isn't much of a pop punk album at all, but I'm including it on the list because, I mean, this is Simple Plan. Up until this album's release, yeah, obviously they were a pop punk band, so to make this giant shift in 2008, I'd love to know what was going on in the marketing meetings for, you know, what Simple Plan, what these marketing and record label executives were pitching to Simple Plan on what to do next to evolve their career. But it's really like a pop rock album, and I guess if you go into it knowing that you're going to listen to a 2008 pop rock album, I guess it's not the worst thing ever. You have a song like What If, which is a pretty good inspirational rock song, My Generation, Your Love Is a Lie, When I'm Gone. They're all okay 2008 pop songs, I guess, but really the entire album is just so generic and bland, there's really not much to say about it, and I hear the term industry plant thrown around a lot on Twitter, on Reddit, and sometimes the bands that get labeled that, I think, it blows me away some of the comments I see, but you really can't get much more industry plant than this album from Simple Plan. And the worst thing is, we've seen mature pop punk albums work in the scene. Some of the best albums to come out in recent years, I think you can categorize as mature pop punk albums, meaning that, you know, sonically they're, you know, fast-paced, poppy punk rock songs, which is like the definition of pop punk, but they're not just songs about high school and breakups and parties and hating your hometown and stuff like that. I mean, you could pretty much throw in any one of the Wonder Years albums, I guess, and really The Hum Goes On Forever, the most recent Wonder Years album, I think is a great example, and you could put that kind of like on a pedestal or showcase like, hey, what's a mature pop-punk album? And you can point to that album. But credit where credit is due to Simple Plan, because pretty much everything they've released after the self-titled in 2008 has been pretty straightforward pop-punk, and for the most part, it's been pretty good. So this album, Screaming Bloody Murder by Sum 41, is pretty much considered the worst album by the band by far, so let's talk about it. So this album was recorded not that long after Derek and Avril Lavigne divorced, so this is a breakup album, but it really doesn't have any of the fun, fast, upbeat songs that Sum 41 are known for. But if you embrace the darker tone and darker sound of this album, I think you can find some really good Sum 41 songs in here. And I think the lyrics to Crash really kind of sum up what this album is about. It's dark, it's about a breakup, it's kind of a retrospective on, you know, going on with life without the person that you thought you were going to grow old with. Sum 41 always gets kind of described as the most metal pop-punk band that there's ever been, but that really isn't on this album at all. What I think Sum 41 was trying to go for was a darker, gritty, kind of a rock opera album, a lot of songs that weave in and out of each other. But what you kind of get, because there's way too many songs on this album, so what you get is this bloated kind of rock album that really doesn't know what it actually is. You have a lot of songs on this album, songs like Jessica Kill or Time for You to Go, Back Where I Belong. A lot of these songs lean way more into just being rock songs, and I think if Sum 41 would have leaned more into that, I think this album would have been received a lot better. Now, Sum 41 did record an entire documentary alongside the recording of this album, and you can really see the kind of struggle that Derek has with alcohol and everything in his personal life while the album is being recorded, so it just kind of makes sense that the album is this kind of mashup of a lot of different tones. But the documentary does have some fun and lighter moments. It's up for free on YouTube if you want to check it out, and I cannot stress enough how funny Sum 41 thought it was to throw things in a pool and be, you know, rock stars and have debauchery. So the documentary is a pretty interesting watch, especially if you want to kind of see the band's and really Derek's process into kind of creating this darker album. And it's kind of crazy that we have Sum 41 is such a big, you know, pop punk band, and we have a documentary about what everyone considers pretty much their worst album. Just kind of an interesting little piece of pop punk history that we have. So if you dismissed this album when it came out, I don't blame you, especially if you're a casual fan of Sum 41. It doesn't really have any of the aspects or sounds that made Sum 41 so popular, but you know, if you listen to the album, I think you'll get a few good rock songs here and there. Blink-182's 9. Now, I've talked about the Matt Skiba era before on the channel, and I think the most disappointing thing about the entire Matt Skiba era is that we never got the perfect mix of what Matt Skiba being in Blink-182 should have been. Like, imagine the perfect mix of Alkaline Trio and Blink-182, and we never got that. California, the band, I think they wanted to ease people into this new member and this kind of transition away from Tom, so California is definitely more fun, upbeat, classic Blink, and that album was received a lot better than 9, but 9 is so close to that perfect mix of Alkaline Trio and Blink-182. I really think Matt Skiba shines on like that second half of 9, but it's just way too polished and overproduced. It's like the album went through like a car wash and it's so shiny and polished before it got out to the public. I would love to hear some of the raw, you know, demos of the 9 kind of recordings. I think, I assume those exist and before they got, you know, super polished. I think that would be really interesting to hear. And also on 9, you have a song called On Some Emo Shit. And you would think that Blink-182 would do something interesting with just that concept, because I'm sure when they were creating the title of this song and they named it that, they were like, oh, of course, fans, you know, I think that might have been like the first song when the album came out that I went to listen to, because it's like, I mean, come on, it's Blink-182, and they have a song called On Some Emo Shit. They knew people were going to be interested in that song, and they could have done so many interesting things, I think. They could have went, like, full Sunny Day Real Estate, or, you know, do a 10-minute instrumental Blink-182 song, go full American football emo, you know, maybe have lyrics that are the emo copy pasta, you know, do something interesting with just this concept, and instead we got this generic Blink-182 song that no one even talks about or remembers at all. Hit the Lights, Invicta, man, I remember hating this album when it came out. Hit the Lights have been around since, like, 2006, and I think in the grand scheme of the scene, they're still pretty underrated. And I want to give Hit the Lights credit because on every album, Hit the Lights changes up their sound. For the most part, all of their albums are pop-punk albums, but slightly different. Like their first album, This Is a Stick-Up, it's a pop-punk album for sure, but it's not like a bright, sunny, you know, Blink-182 pop-punk album. It's a little bit more just darker in tone and just the way it sounds. It sounds like a pop-punk album you would listen to, you know, in like the dead of winter. It's not something you're gonna, you know, blast in a bright sunny day in the middle of July. And then you have Skip School, Start Fights, which is that bright sunny pop-punk album that you want to blast in the summer. And then we have Invicta. I have no idea who this album is for. I don't want to say that Hit the Lights alienated their fan base, but I mean, I guess kinda. If you know, listened and were a fan of Hit the Lights after their first two albums, either one really, and then you got to this third album, it doesn't sound like any of the past two, so there's not really much to grab onto if you were a Hit the Lights fan. This album did grow on me a little bit. Songs like All the Weight are pretty good, and as I've had, you know, years and years with this album, I've gone to that song quite a bit. And then Earthquake as well. That song was used for Seth Rollins, like, video package for, like, WWE and WrestleMania, so I kind of, like, got reintroduced to that song years after it was initially released. So those kind of two songs are have grown on me, but those are really the only two that I ever come back to on this album. But again, I gotta give credit to Hit the Lights. I always like giving credit to bands when they listen to their fans and they adjust. After Invicta, the band's next album, Summer Bones, is this intense, fast-paced, almost an easycore type of an album, so they listen to their fans. Now, Hit the Lights haven't really done anything in years, but they recently posted studio photos on their Facebook page, so we all know what that means. So I'm really interested to hear what sound Hit the Lights kind of go for, because the pop-punk / emo scene has changed, you know, just over the course of their career so much, so it's going to be interesting to see what kind of sound they do on their next album, EP, or song. Green Day's Father of All. Come on, you knew I was going to talk about this one. If we're talking about some of the worst pop-punk albums of all time, if you don't have this album on your list, I don't know what you're doing. Do you remember all of the rumors and all of the things that were happening surrounding this album? The first rumor that came out was that this album was bad on purpose because it was the last album that was on Green Day's current record deal, and they didn't want to, you know, help the label by making something, you know, that sells a lot. And I think it was like the entire like length of this album is like a few minutes past what a album has to be contractually in length to be considered an album. And then we had the rumor that Green Day was actually going to release a completely new album like months after Father of All's release, and it was going to be a good album because they didn't want to piss off any of their fans. Now, if you weren't online at the time and you're thinking, Michael, that's completely insane, you got to remember that we had a lot of leaks that were supporting all of this. We had leaked songs, we had leaked vinyl covers, we had a leaked album title, magnum opus of the glorious kind, or whatever that fake album title was. And the story even gets crazier because all of that was done by the band Panicland, and we never really got a reason as to why. I think the band released a statement and they were like, well, art is, you know, art, and you can't really say that this was, you know, like a pointless, dumb thing to do because it was fulfilling and it was art. And I mean, I agree, I guess, in that sense, but like Panicland never capitalized on any of that. Like, if you look up Panicland on Google, they're just the band that made all this fake Green Day stuff. Now, based on my research, Panicland hasn't done like anything at all since like 2020. So I guess it was worth it. And we can't forget the infamous Green Day billboard that came out in support of Father of All. Now, at the time, we all kind of thought that this was like an inside joke between Green Day and their fans, that this is some billboard that was against, what was it, like a Swedish producer or something along those lines. And it was like, oh, like a funny kind of like promotional tool that they knew would get, would go viral. But it's been years since all of that happened, and Green Day and no one has come out to say that that was like a joke on purpose. Like, everybody thinks Father of All, this entire album, was some big joke, but there's literally zero evidence to support that. So the only logical conclusion that we can make is that Green Day or their marketing people or the record label did sit around in a boardroom and think that Green Day's fans would like this billboard, then they would think it was cool, and they would go support Green Day and buy this album because of how rebellious Green Day was against pop music at the time. So, I mean, if that's what these giant labels think is good marketing, then maybe Father of All got the response that it deserved. Let me put on the glasses here, because the band has only spoken about the Father of All marketing really only one time that I could find, and it was an interview with Vulture where Billy Joe's talking about that there wasn't really any problem with the label and they never wanted to blame their label for anything, and it clearly states that they had no issue with their label for this album. So again, the only logical conclusion to draw is that Green Day made this album and they thought that it was good and they thought that it would be well received. So getting to the actual music on Father of All, it's just bland, boring, generic. I mean, the best thing to say about this album is that it's so short. The album really just sounds like a bad indie rock album from the like mid 2000s. Like, if you had told me this was a like a bad Jet album from 2007, I'd believe you. Green Day really needs to sit down for one of those like hour-long interviews and just talk about the entire process of this album, from the music to the album arts, just everything about it. Because even with all the information that I researched and found out and all the interviews and stuff, I still can't believe that the final product that we got was what Green Day intended. It doesn't make any sense to me unless I'm completely missing something. But kudos to Green Day, at least they kind of course corrected on Saviors, and Saviors was an album that pretty much everybody, if you didn't think it was, great, you at least thought it was kind of a good return to form for Green Day. And pretty much that's what I said in my review of the album. And even I went back kind of after Father of All. I needed something to cleanse my palate after all of that. And Saviors is a good Green Day album. It's a good rock album. So, again, credit to Green Day for at least coming out with a solid album after whatever Father of All is. That's it. Those are my thoughts on some of the worst pop punk albums of all time. Let me know what you think about some of these albums, and let me know what some of your choices would be for some of the worst pop punk albums of all time. Please like the video. Please subscribe if you haven't. Thanks for watching, and remember, stay posy, and as always, defend pop punk.